This is a lecture on supply chains, week 4, relationships. This is not a live stream, but it's a video I'll make because on Monday was a holiday. So I'll make this video on relationships, and then we'll have office hours next week at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Okay, so let's bring up the website. Here's a website under supply chain management, and the lecture then down here would be relationships. Relationships both under commodities and also supply chain analytics. So they're both the same. So let's download relationships and open the lecture. So this is the lecture. Okay, so let's go through this. Let's enlarge this so we can see it. There we go. Okay, on this first page here, I give an outline of initial takeaways from we first talk about alliances, and there's 3 types of alliances we will talk about: third-party logistics, retailer supplier partnerships, and distributor integration. Then we go into outsourcing and procurement, advantages and disadvantages, and the different drivers and the supply side, demand side, and the different strategies for components, strategies for products, supply side, demand side, and we'll look at procurement and outsourcing as a strategy within supply chains. And then finally, we end with e-markets on how the different structure of e-markets and the benefit of e-markets. Okay, so first of all, an overview of alliances and partnerships. Well, here's a spectrum here. We start with internal activities, and then when we go outside the organization, we have acquisitions. Now, acquisitions is going to be bring them in-house, or the next would be an arm's length transaction. And usually the arm's length transaction has to do with contract. The contract, you do this, I pay this, you do this, we do that, and it's well defined. And so it's an arm's length. There is no real, the only relationships is the work done and pay for the work. Okay, and so this is more outsourcing. The internal activities and acquisitions are in-house, and the arm's length is outsourcing, but also strategic alliances. Here's a spectrum right here. Arm's length is very limited relationships just within a contract, but strategic alliances go much deeper. Strategic alliances are an integration of companies that shares risks and rewards, the information and knowledge, capabilities and expertise, goals and growth. And so strategic alliances is like an extension of your organization with another company. Okay, the benefits. Well, you can expand your products. You can have more products. You expand your markets. The operations can become more efficient, and for a number of reasons. One, you can lower your resources because you can partake in other people's resources, and also you can have expertise, technology, growth in technology. Growth, you're going to be partnering, so you're going to help each other grow. Organizational skills and financial strength. The risks: jeopardizing differentiating core strengths in the market arena. In other words, when you start having alliances and partnerships, strong partnerships, you jeopardize those core strengths because someone else might overtake what you do or learn from you and then do it better than you. So all different kinds of situations. Another is trade-off between short-term and long-term advantages. And so you can have short-term benefits, but sometimes the short-term benefits will undermine long-term growth. And so you have a trade-off between those two, and that's a risk. The other is drain of expertise due to uneven abilities. So someone brings more to the table than another party, and so that's inequity, and so sometimes that's a problem. And finally, this is a big one: changing company emphasis. Companies change. They change their focus, they change their strategy. And so when you have a long-term relationship and then the company focus begins to change, then you have to have something, an exit strategy within that alliance. We're going to consider 3 alliances and partnerships: 3PL, RSP, and DI. So here's a simple definition or description. I would say definition, a description. Third-party logistics is a relationship with external partners to the supply chain. Retailer-supplier relationship is a relationship between upstream and downstream partners in the supply chain. And distributor integration is a relationship between partners at the same level in the supply chain. Now, some of these are probably familiar from the logistics configuration, and they are. These are the relationships that are embedded within those logistical configurations. And you'll see some of that in the homework. Okay, let's go through each one of these. To introduce third-party logistics, you have a relationship with external partners to the supply chain. Well, you're going to have a logistics supplier relationship of just transaction-based, single function specific. And if you think you can just go with a FedEx and just say, here's the package, get it there, and then that's a transaction-based. We'll pay you the money, you do the job, single function, we're done. So that is more of a logistics supplier relationship that's transaction-based and single function specific. Now, even though it's transaction-based, you can have more than one function, but usually the simplest is a single function. On the other end of the spectrum, this is a spectrum. This isn't bipolar. I mean, this isn't just binomial. This is a spectrum. On the other end is a third-party logistics alliance, where you have a long-term relationship, and it's very system-specific. In other words, you are going to partner with this third party with a very specific partnership, depending on what system that partner, you and the partner, are going to collaborate in. So if you're going to do it, here's a stepwise profile. First of all, we have identify your drivers. Okay, in other words, down here, the drivers are balance, focus, core competencies with loss of control. In other words, the benefit is you can focus on your core competencies and let them do what they're good at. You'll do what you're good at, and then there's a collaboration and a mutual benefit there. On the other hand, if they're doing some of your business, then you're losing control of that because they're in control of that. So you have to balance the focus on core competencies with loss of control. And so that's step one, identifying the drivers and the need for a 3PL. Do you need it? Can you get away without it? And you have to make a decision, do you need it before you ever pursue it? Now, step 2 and step 3 go together, hand in hand. Step 2 is determine alternatives. In other words, where is the most appropriate areas to use the 3PL? When you have a third party, where are they going to be used, and where's the most appropriate area for them to contribute? You don't do it because it's easy, you do it because it's beneficial. And this is going to be helpful, beneficial, and the best benefit is mutually beneficial to both parties, to you and the 3PL. The others determine the scope. Once you say, okay, fine, this is where the 3PL is going to be partnering, determine the scope. How much control will be given away, and what will be the amount of authority and responsibility to the partner. And so, first of all, determine where and how, and then how much. And notice these two go together. And if the scope is limited, maybe you change the type and where that particular third party will be within B2C, B2B. Maybe B2B is better than B2C. Okay. And then finally, select your partner. Now, in the selection of the partner, step 4, that's right here, select your partner, and then implement. Under step 4, evaluate the adaptability, reliability, and flexibility of potential partners. Examine the specialization competency of potential partners. Okay, now these two really is just establishing information, gather information. Gather information about the partner, the adaptability, reliability, flexibility, or the administrative aspect of a partner, the specialization, competency, the actual technical capability of a partner. And once you get that information, then you sit down and go through a selection process. Conduct an evaluation and negotiate sometimes, and finally it ends in a selection process, whether you select them or you don't select them. Now this process here is part of decision analysis, is part of selection, and there's models that go through decision making that are extremely robust and very repeatable, and also it can reflect the characteristic of an organization. And then implement. Initiate the alliance with care. Actually, another way to say that, just be careful. And don't do it too fast. Follow project management knowledge areas. And I think that's key. Don't just implement it. Implement it with a plan. Implement it with foundational knowledge of how to implement a project. The project is to create a successful result of a partnership. The different knowledge areas, I listed them here: scope, scope management, team management, communication management, change management, technical approach. Only launch alliance after extensive planning and verification of the scope and plan. Scope, what you're doing, and plan how you do it. And I just want to mention here that project management is a key knowledge area and skill area within supply chain. If you're going to be a good supply chain manager, you have to have a very good knowledge and skill in project management. Okay, so we talked about the benefit. This is like discussion is more like in review of what we just talked about. The next one is the RSPs, the retailer supplier, relationship between upstream and downstream partners in the supply chain, within the supply chain. So here we have the supplier upstream, the retailer downstream, and here we have the electronic data interchange, EDI. And so what type of relationship or partnership do we have retailer to supplier? Well, there's a spectrum. First of all, if you look at the retailer point of sale down here, and the retailer then has ownership of the inventory and makes the decisions, and then the RSP, then the supplier up here, is mainly just going to be a quick response strategy. In other words, when you give it to me, the partnership is we're going to agree to share information, share benefits, share revenue sometimes, share profitability and growth, but we're going to give you a quick response. So that's going to be what the supplier brings to the table, quick response. And that's when the retailer at the point of sale owns the inventory and makes the decisions. Well, the expected result is decrease your lead time, obviously. Since it's a quick response, the lead time is going to be reduced. But the initial requirements is trust and confidentiality. You have to trust each other to maintain that, because you don't have time to negotiate. It's quick response. And then you have to stay confidential, because the information that's going upstream of the retailer to the supplier, sometimes that information, the demand information, the product information, can be sensitive. Next is when you have a shared ownership of the inventory and shared policy decisions. That's referred to as a continuous replenishment. In other words, the supplier and the retailer both share in the decision making, ownership, and so you have a continuous replenishment. Continuous replenishment usually, I guess most directly is applied like when the organization has centralized analysis of the logistical configuration. They have control upstream and downstream, and they control it with a global strategy. But the continuous replenishment simply means the demand downstream is shared upstream, and so they share the responsibility. So the expected results, you hope, initially, and these are expected but initial results, reduce the bullwhip effect. We'll talk about the bullwhip effect later. It's just accuracy in this EDI. The EDI is more accurate. And also communication and cooperation upstream and downstream. So this communication has to be continual and high quality. Finally, when the supplier here has ownership and decisions, ownership of the inventory and inventory policy decisions, they're in control. That's called vendor managed inventory, or VMI, vendor managed inventory. So the idea of that is you can increase your inventory turnover because upstream they're making sure that they're shipping, they have the ability to ship large and small amounts, and they can focus on the turnover rate. And as we saw in inventory, the EPP, so they look at cost and also the turnover for service levels, and they can balance those upstream because usually they have more analytical resources upstream than they do downstream. The initial requirements is top management commitment. It has to be committed. There has to be a commitment from the top management. Now, these requirements here, all of these pretty much apply to all of these. And these results pretty much apply to all of these, okay, just in different amounts. And that's why I say expected and initial, because this is not exclusive. These are just, these types of RSPs should always impact and require these kinds of requirements and results. You should see that. But that doesn't mean you don't see that on the others too. And you will, if done right, if done correctly. Okay, the last one is distributor integration, relationship between partners at the same level in the supply chain. So we've seen this, we saw this last time with transshipment, with the logistical configuration. Well, now we're talking about relationships within that configuration. So now we have a manufacturer, a simple three-stage model. Manufacturer, customer, but we have distributors, and we're going to have more than one distributor spread out. Okay, and by the way, we have a manufacturer. As we go downstream, again, it's more of dendritic kind of a fan. So there's not one customer down here. There's many customers, and a distributor or wholesaler will distribute to a set of customers. So the idea is you can share not only inventory, but you can also sell services if they're needed, information, and expertise. Okay, inventory, that's pretty obvious. So this distributor has a customer down here, and this customer needs a product that this distributor does not have, but this distributor does have. Let's say distributor A, and down here distributor B. So A does not have something that a customer wants, but B does, so they'll share that inventory, and then all of a sudden they satisfy the demand. Again, virtual inventory. But what about services? Well, if you have a customer down here who wants to repair something that distributor A does not know how to repair that, they can go to distributor B and they can provide that service. Information. Well, the most direct information is demand. When you have information going between A and B, B can begin seeing A's demand or the character of the demand or what kind of items are being demanded from that market area, and A can see B. And finally, expertise. Well, sometimes you can share and training sessions between different distributors or different stages at the different levels at the same stage. They can say, oh, well, here, let me show you how to do this, or let me provide a training session on a certain product or a certain type of a new product entry. Okay, so features. Inventory provide perception of expanded inventory to satisfy customer needs. And we saw that again back in logistics. Services rely on technical ability of other distributors to expand expertise to customers. Information, increased forecast accuracy. Share customer satisfaction and needs of product and service. And finally, new product introduction and education and training for expertise. Risks. Not adequate rewards, benefits, recognition systems to all parties. In other words, is it equitable? Someone is getting more benefit than someone else. Well, these people are not going to complain. These people may. So there's a problem of rewards and benefits and recognition that are going to be equitable. Does not allow technical growth of perceived weaker partners. A weaker partner just keeps depending on the stronger partners, and they're not really growing. So the idea of distributed integration is that you either maintain a status quo or one becomes stronger in a certain area. Imbalance of cooperation within a system. This becomes a problem, especially if there's turnover of employees, turnover of foremen or directors. So what happens is that, again, A and B, anytime A needs something, well, B satisfies it. Anytime B needs something, they don't get it. Or they don't get it until a week later when it should be an hour later. And so imbalance of cooperation within the system, and that can be a problem. Okay, but when it does work, you have a lot of benefits. Okay, let's go to outsourcing any markets, Chapter 9. First of all, some definitions here on outsourcing. You can have procurement of material or outsourcing of functions. And so there's a lot of overlap in these definitions. The definitions I'm using, procurement, is really talking about material. Outsourcing is outsourcing of functions. In other words, a third party, or they're going to actually perform something and then give it to you, kind of thing. Okay, the advantages of outsourcing, you can lower your cost because someone else is doing the work, increase flexibility, and lower your risks. Okay, because especially if the partner, if the outsourcing agent has much more capability and expertise. The disadvantage is loss of control. That's the big one. Of design, quality, or production of your operation. The other, increased coordination. In other words, you have to have a lot more coordination of your policies have to be known and adhered to. The processes have to be defined, and the people have to be educated and trained. And so increased coordination becomes a problem, an added extra requirement, and sometimes that's a big disadvantage because it takes away from your resources. And finally, loss of brand identification. If you're outsourcing a function of some kind, well, then they're getting credit for instead of you. Okay, and finally, also loss of competitive knowledge and conflicting objectives. We've already mentioned that before. But also the advantages, economies of scale, risk pooling, reduced capital investment, and focus on core competencies. And I guess down here of these additional ones, focusing on your core competencies becomes probably one of the best, strongest advantages. You do what you do best and don't try to do too many things. When you're trying to do too many things with small resources, human resources, stick to what they do well and outsource the ones that are not critical, or outsource other functions. Okay. Well, first of all, let's talk about outsourcing considerations of products and components. Let's start with products, the products themselves. Well, Fine and Whitney define drivers to outsource of limited capacity or limited knowledge or ability. Okay, down here, here's under Fine and Whitney. If you have limited capacity or limited knowledge, then you don't have the capacity to do it or the knowledge to do it, you're going to outsource it. Well, they also, Ulrich and Swaminathan, identify different product types, modular and integral. Modular means the functionality is based on individual modules. So a module is almost self-contained, and how the modules go together creates the product. Integral means the functionality based on the integration of the modules. In other words, the modules are not independent, they're dependent, but the integration of those modules define the functionality of the product, and that's an integral product. So it depends on what they are, what the product is. So for a modular product with limited capacity, the driver, the outsourcing consideration is a very low risk, because if you outsource it, they're just having different components. Then you have other components in house, and so all the only risk that you have is just the components, the modular components. The outsourced agent or the partner is going to contribute. On the other hand, if you have limited capacity for an integral product, well, the risk goes up, because now remember, they're all interdependent, they're related, okay? They are integrated, and so therefore limited capacity, you don't have enough capacity to make everything that product needs. And so when you outsource it, all of a sudden that outsourced partner or those outsourced products are part of the functionality of your product. It's not just a portion of it, it's integral to the entire product. On the other hand, if it's modular and you have limited knowledge, well, that's going to increase your risk, because if you don't have the knowledge to do it, then that has greater risk of losing control of the product itself. And of course, if you have an integral product with limited knowledge, that's high risk. And someone could say, if you don't know how to do it, then why are you making it in the first place? Why don't you just buy it? Why are you trying to make it? Anyway, so that's the idea. Okay, these are products. Now, outsourcing components, the components of a product. Okay, well here, FINE, the different strategies that FINE comes up with, and these are articles, and very good articles, by the way. FINE talks about, well, how important are these components to the customer, high or low? Clock speed. Okay, here's the first introduction of the term clock speed. Clock speed of a component, even a product, is the time that product becomes either obsolete or replaced with a new version. Okay, now also that is replaced with a new version. It may still be, the old version may be still workable, but we have a new version, and eventually that old version is going to go away. And you think of electronics, cell phones, you think of computers, you think of CPUs, and you think of different motherboards, or you think of different add-ins, even software. So they always have updates, operating systems, and so the clock speed is going to how long it's going to last. A good example is a telephone. The old telephones that were made 100 years ago, they're still working. You can still dial if you want to have a landline. But today, when you have a cell phone or a smartphone, well, the clock speed is much shorter, maybe 2, 5, 6 years, maybe 8 years. But all of a sudden, they're not going to work as well, and you have to replace it. So that's what the clock speed means. Well, if you have a fast clock speed or slow clock speed, FINE says that's going to define different types of strategies for those components. So a competitive position, how competitive are you in the marketplace based on those components? In other words, is a component critical to your product in the marketplace? And finally, the architecture, capable suppliers. Do you have suppliers that can actually do it? So that's the upstream side. Okay, well, the idea here is if you have very high customer importance. That product is important. Very fast clock speed, high competitive position because the product and the component is very competitive, so it's very rapid. It's happening quickly. Do you want to outsource it? No, you don't. Keep it in-house. Keep control of it because you have to keep producing it pretty fast. On the other hand, if it's not that important to the customer, it's not that critical, the clock speed is slow, it's not that competitive, so fine, outsource it because there's very little risk to outsource it. So these are pretty self-explanatory and hopefully obvious, not obvious, understandable, put it that way. But then what happens if let's say the customer importance is high and down here the competitive position is weak, but it's a fast clock speed versus slow clock speed. Now you have capable suppliers. Then how does this, and let's shade this in a little bit to emphasize it, maybe a little bit more. So how does this difference here affect your strategy? Well, first of all, since it's high importance, you want to say no. In other words, don't outsource it, keep it in-house. On the other hand, if this capable supplier is stronger than the importance of the customer, then you might want to outsource it to only one supplier, a reliable supplier. Okay, so maybe no, maybe yes, it depends. Now, what if you have a very slow clock speed? Well, the slow clock speed initially says, fine, go ahead and outsource it. Especially if it's modular, definitely outsource it. But even if it's a slow clock speed and it's integral, you still would rather keep it in-house. Unless you had a very capable, strong, capable supplier. So then the modular, do you want to outsource it? Maybe you want to keep it in-house because of the high customer. Or it's a capable supplier, so maybe, yeah, we can outsource it. So here, Fine gives a very good analysis and strategy. There's no one answer, but he shows a procedure, a process to go through to make decisions, to balance the criteria. For this particular supply chain, for this particular component, and the component goes into this particular product, then what type of strategy would you embrace and move on? So he gives a process. Okay. Now, Kraljic looks at the supply side up here, upstream supply. So now, Fisher and Kraljic, they look not so much at the product. They do look at the products, but they're looking at the implication of the upstream and downstream supply chain on the products. Okay, first of all, the supply side. The procurement of supply strategies, factors in procurement material, profit impact, supply risk. The demand side looks at functional products, innovative products, two types of products. Okay, first let's look at the upstream supply side. So let's look at this arrow down here. On the supply side, let's look at two different factors. A profit impact, the monetary influence on cost, revenue, growth, monetary growth. Okay, that's a profit impact of an item. And then the supply risk, the logistical influence on the supply, availability, and service levels. For example, if the profit impact is low, in other words, low margin, it's not that much of a monetary benefit, but there's very high supply risk. Even though it's cheap, you have to have it. Then those are referred to as bottleneck items because they're high risk, they're high supply risk, you're going to need them. even though they're not that expensive, you still need them. And so since they're low profit impact, there's where the long-term contracts come in. The longer the term, drive down the cost. It's easy. You know you're going to need them. It's probably a slow clock speed, and it has a high supply risk. Let's make sure we have them because we want to mitigate any downside events on the supply side because there's high risk. You want to mitigate that risk. On the other hand, what if you have low profit impact but a very low supply risk? Well, then they're non-critical items. And I say spot purchase as an example. Spot purchase means, well, when you need to go buy it, and that's like C items and inventory control. You have A items, which are high ticket items, high margin items. B items and C items are staple items like paper, pencils, paper clips, erasers for the blackboard. So very staple items, spot purchase, or just purchase whatever it is because they're non-critical. If you need them, go get them. And usually there's not much of a supply risk. They're readily available. You just go to the store and buy one. Just go to Walmart and get an eraser if you need an eraser. Okay, then what happens if you have a high supply risk and a high profit impact? Well, those are strategic items because they're strategic on the supply side, they're strategic on the profit side. They're important. So here, the top management focus, you're going to have focus on these strategic items. Maybe you're going to have contracts that are going to be short. Maybe they're going to have lawyers overview this, but these are going to be strategic items, are going to be revisited by top management as part of the strategic plan of the organization. And it may change. It may be part of a strategic plan within the portfolio of this organization. On the other hand, if you have high profit impact, but you have low supply risk, well, these are referred to as leverage items. Since it's high profit and low supply risk, then you have room, you have degrees of freedom on the supply side to negotiate lower costs because of very high profit impact. And so there's when you begin looking at the supply contracts because they're low supply risk. Okay, you can negotiate or go to multiple different suppliers. So the leverage items essentially means that you can leverage the low supply risk for a more beneficial profit impact contract and impact your profit more because there's a high impact. Okay, and so a very, very good strategy for the supply side up for your suppliers. Okay, let's look at the demand side. Fisher demand side talks about a supplier footprint and two types of products: a functional product and innovative product. Well, okay, a functional product, slow clock speed, low demand variability, low profit margin. You can think of very cheap items. They're here forever. A very good example of that is the pencil. The design of the pencil, I think, hasn't changed significantly or at all since 1930, 1940, something like that. And we still have the same design. Maybe we have a different kind of eraser, but that's a functional product that has a very slow clock speed. Okay, the demand is relatively low, low profit margins. It's a staple item. On the other end of the spectrum, an innovative product is fast clock speed, high demand variability, high profit margins. Those are the high-tech items. Those are the high-tech items that are moving fast, that are changing every 6 months, that are being upgraded. And actually software, different types of operating systems at the operating level, but also applied software could be part of this as well. Okay, Under functional products, again, slow product clock speed, high product demand predictability. You pretty much know what the demand's going to be. The profit's low. The product variety is low. There's not that many different products, just a few. The forecast error is very low variability. So what's the strategy? Usually a push strategy. A push strategy is more creating inventory. You're creating inventory, demand's met out of inventory, and you create inventory because cost is your objective. And driving down the cost of your inventory, focus on supply chain planning, and you can actually do offshoring. And so usually a push strategy for inventory downstream is creating inventory. It's a make-to-stock operation. On the other hand, for innovative products, fast clock speed. It's coming and going. Low product demand predictability. It could be high one day, low next day. Oh my goodness. There's so much unpredictability. High profit margins, though, that's why you're paying attention to it. High product variety, you can keep changing the model every few months. And finally, high forecast error. There's a lot of variability. So that might be a pull strategy. A pull strategy is make to order. Is it wait for the order and then put it together? The service is your objective. Focus on order fulfillment and onshoring. Keep it in onshoring. Keep it in house because you want to stay on top of it because it changes so quickly. So these are two ends of the spectrum, and for the functional product and then the innovative product. So the idea is, which one do you do? There may be something in between. Again, a framework to make decisions. Okay, so now when you look at the components here, on the supply side for Kraljic, and here you have Kraljic and Fisher here, and then you have the demand side down here. Okay, this really shows you a combination of strategies and framework to come up with well-informed strategies within your supply chain. Okay, the last thing is e-markets. There are different e-markets, and here's 4. There's more than this, but here's 4. Okay. First of all, public, a supplier-driven horizontal market design that is competition-based. Okay. And then a private is a buyer-driven vertical market design that is focused on control between the supplier and buyer, a vertical market. Okay. Now, between these two, you have something called Consortium, a buyer-driven vertical market design with supplier collaboration that is focused primarily on administrative efficiency. Okay, so therefore, a buyer-driven, okay, and so the supplier collaborates so that they can have administrative efficiency for the buyer. Now, content is either a supplier-driven horizontal market design with buyer collaboration with a focus on MRO material, or a buyer-driven vertical market design with supplier collaboration focus on supplying industry-specific material, like the medical industry, for example. Okay, so a content looks at the material that they have. Okay, maintenance, repair, and operations could be material that are focusing on that material, or industry-specific material for specific industries. So the supplier links through e-markets in business to business is, first of all, you have increased competition. The drivers are lowering cost. Increased flexibility, and so you can enhance bidding capabilities. Increased knowledge and increased standardization, which we'll see here in a minute. and increase value and support strategic alliances. And that's why we talk about strategic alliances, because the value goes up and lowering cost with increased knowledge and flexibility. Now, sometimes they're monetized. You can have a transaction fee, you can have a licensing fee, a subscription fee. It really depends on the market. So here's an overview of the e-markets. Public is competition-based. Services, price, quality are the benefits, and that's usually the focus. Supplier-driven, and it's a horizontal. So up here, it's supplier-driven. The seller is driving this because it's competition-based. So the buyer negotiates the best deal here. On the other hand, private is collaboration-based, and the benefit is control. It's buyer-driven and vertical. So the buyer says, I want to negotiate with a seller, and I want control of what that seller provides for me. And so that is more buyer-driven, so that the seller provides for the buyer. And so usually the buyer has a lot more capability. They're larger, they're bigger, they're more expensive, like the military or the government or a very large organization or utilities. They're going to dictate from the seller. Now in the middle here, you have consortiums where you have administrative efficiency. You standardize services. It's buyer-driven with supplier collaboration. It's vertical. So the consortium says, well, instead of one, it's like private usually is just one seller or just a very small group of sellers. Consortiums, a consortium of sellers says, we're going to focus on a market, one market area over here, and we're going to share information, share expertise, so that there's enough of a market for all of us, but we're focusing on this market. And so you can have one of these 3 or 5 because they have standardized their services, so the service you're going to get from each one is high quality, and it's pretty much the same. Now, as far as content is concerned, you can either standardize the material, we're supplier driven, because that's MRO material, horizontal, or you can standardize material with buyer driven, okay, with a vertical. So MRO content would be horizontal here. And then industry-specific content would be vertical, because that industry needs a very specific material. A good example of vertical industry-specific material is the medical field or some specialized equipment such as NASA or in the Space Force, whatever we have. Okay, so that's the idea. But the benefits here is that the e-markets are quick, are fast, are versatile, okay, and you can focus on the different markets and the needs of the different markets. Well, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. Now, as we go forward, I'm going to post a homework assignment, and after I post the homework assignment, I'm going to have office hours. I'm also going to have another video, and the other video is going to be on the homework. And again, I have version A, version B. A is quantitative, B is qualitative, and they're really talking about the same thing. The answers, the ABCD answers are the same. But again, I want you to look at the qualitative side, the quantitative side, and learn from both. And so the whole point of the homework is to learn from those things, and it'll help you as much as I can. That's all I have for today, for this lecture. I hope this helps, and I'll post this, and between now and the next time I see you, I just want to urge you to be safe, be careful, don't take anything for granted. So